Well, good morning again. We are in Matthew 10. Toby's going to read a couple chapters for us.
Yeah, he's going to do the whole thing, I think, actually. Yeah, John, we're in Matthew 10. We're going to do verses 5 through 15, and that's page 815 if you're using the chair Bible. Matthew 10 says, "And he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. The names of the 12 are these: first, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, 'Go nowhere among the Gentiles, and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. You received without paying, give without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or two tunics, or sandals, or a staff, for the laborer deserves his food. And whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy in it, and stay there until you depart. As you enter the house, greet it, and if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave the house or town. Truly I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town.'"
All right, good work. Thank you. Appreciate that. So we are Grace Life Bible Church, and we're excited about a lot of things, but primarily God and His Word. That's where everything starts, right? It starts with God and His Word. We get into it. We have questions about it. We study it. And then from that, we experience His grace. We learn about His grace. We experience it. Very natural, difficult, but healthily natural to extend that grace to people that are difficult, not just nice people. And then we grow in healthy relationships and naturally impacting those far and near. And so that's kind of the flow of what we're doing. But we are intentional disciples who invite others to experience and extend God's grace to others. So that's kind of what we're about, where we're going. And changed up our pyramid here. But basically, our values of knowing, experiencing, growing, impacting can be summarized in just two words: experiencing and extending. So what we're about is experiencing His grace and then extending His grace and trusting the Holy Spirit to guide us to the right time, the right words, when to speak, when not to speak, what to just absorb and what to confront. You know what I mean? The wisdom. And then it's all about making disciples. You know, the end of Matthew, spoiler alert, the story turns dark. Jesus is killed, but then He raises from the dead. But after He raises from the dead, He says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore, make disciples of all nations." I put Jews and Gentiles because that's kind of a big deal here. But that's kind of where we are, okay? And so the question for today, I asked you, like, where's your ladder? And by that I mean, you know, what building is your ladder leaning against? What are you climbing towards? How do you define success? If someone said, "Are you a successful Christian?" That's a weird question, right? It's just phrased a bit odd. But where do you go with that? How do you measure success? How do you know? Are you a successful Christian? What defines success? We're going to get into that because Jesus has an answer that's super unlike our culture, unlike their culture. And so what Toby just read, you know, go and heal the sick, cast out demons, and all these things, is that successful? I've never raised anybody from the dead, so I guess I'm not successful. See, you can kind of get weird with that in a heartbeat, but that's where we're going. Okay, so let's review Matthew a little bit. 4 Gospels, they all tell the same story. How come we got 4 of them? Because they're written to different audiences. Matthew is writing to the Jews, Mark to the Romans, Luke to the broader Hellenistic Greek culture, and John to the world. And so we are in Matthew, specifically focusing on Jesus, the messianic, the Old Testament messianic, anticipated, prophesied Messiah. They had expectations. We'll get into that again. I know I keep bumping into that, but it's just all over the New Testament. Their expectations of the Messiah, radically different than Jesus' own identity. And so that mismatch is a source of a lot of problems. So Matthew is writing to Jews, 468 Old Testament quotes, allusions. He uses kingdom of heaven a lot. He doesn't really kingdom of God that much. Prophecy fulfills the law, and on and on and on. So that's kind of where we're going with that. And so far to chapter 8, we've seen specific prophecies fulfilled. We have a bunch more coming up in the last half. But he came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. That's where he's going. And I love this. This is just a good summary. It's Matthew 11, 28 to 30. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And that statement is in context of his culture, where the Pharisees' yoke, and it was something they talked about, the yoke of your rabbi, what does he expect of you? And that was crushing expectations, and nobody could measure up. And so the Pharisees are condemning everybody, and Jesus said, my yoke is easy, primarily because he's the one that bore it, and through faith we access that. But that's what's going on there. Okay, so Jesus has been teaching a lot of things. It's interesting, if you go through Matthew, listen to this. Chapter 5, love your enemies. Pharisees don't do that. Don't be hypocrites in the synagogues. Pharisees. Don't be anxious about earthly things. Pharisees. Don't judge others. Pharisees. Okay? Essentially, he's saying, don't be like the Pharisees. And if you know anything about mountain biking on technical terrain, you know you can't focus on what not to do and where not to go. I'm just kind of joking here, but your focus has to be, where am I going? Not where I don't want to go, right? And if you focus your life on, I'm not doing these things, well, great, but what are you doing? So you don't want to focus on the negative. And so here's in Matthew 8, the focus was Jesus has messianic authority. He heals a leper, heals the centurion's servant, heals Peter's mother-in-law, heals many who are oppressed by demons, calms a storm, and heals 2 more men with demons. And so authority. What does Jesus do in chapter 28? What does he say about authority? All authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. And here, he takes that authority and he gives it to his disciples. We'll get to that. Chapter 9, whole lot of stuff going on here, but this is last Sunday. Jesus has the authority to change the rules. The old covenant Torah of law and the heavy burden, that's gone. His new covenant is mercy and compassion. All right? So he associates with sinners like Matthew. He supersedes the law. He raises the dead, gives sight to the blind, gives speech to the mute. All of those things are specific Old Testament actions. And so when people in that culture see Jesus do this or see his followers, disciples doing this, their natural conclusion is, hey, that's Messiah stuff. Who are you following? Who are you with? This is Messiah stuff. Are you following the Messiah? That's a natural thing, okay? And so, but it begins saying, I desire mercy, and it ends saying he has compassion. So that's where we are. That's where we've been. Just a brief summary here. This is really important. Anytime you open the New Testament, you have to realize that Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. Okay, he didn't come to abolish it. He fulfilled it. And so the law is like you close the book and you put it on the shelf and you have a different book. You have a different focus. And so Mount Sinai is the anticipated promise and Mount Calvary is the realized promise. And so that's not how Jews thought, though, okay? This is how Old Testament Jews thought. The Abrahamic covenant came. We have the promise, Genesis 12, blessing, land seed blessing, all that stuff. And then the law comes, and the average Jew is like, oh, the law has replaced the promise, and the law is now forever the new thing. This is our normal operating system, and this is how it always will be, except Jesus shows up and says, the law is done, and the fulfillment of that, and now the promise continues. And this tension, especially that this new covenant is open to Gentiles, that tension is behind most every single book in the New Testament. It's just like, what are you talking about Gentiles? And how can the Jews? Okay, that tension is a big deal. So that was their big deal. So the Mosaic law ends with Jesus, and the fulfillment is in him, and so that's kind of where we are. All right, moving on. Today, conquer versus compassion. Jesus gives his disciples authority. I'm going to paint a picture here in a bit. What do you think the disciples are going to want to do with authority? I mean, they're not exactly on track with where Jesus is, and he gives them authority. And right there, I might have a business leadership managerial meeting with Jesus. I'm not really sure they're ready for this step. Anyway, okay, you get what I'm saying. It's kind of funny because we don't know. Anyway, verse 1, he called to him his 12 disciples. There's some math here, watch. His 12 disciples, he gave them authority to cast them out and heal every disease and affliction. Hang on to verse 2, I'll get to that later. But these are his disciples. I want you to understand that in the New Testament, every time you read the word disciple does not automatically mean a believer. I was in Wisconsin, I saw this car, I took a picture of it because it's just hilarious. You get it? Born again. Like born. Okay, anyway. So the point is, just because the Pharisees had disciples. Well, they're not believers in Jesus. John the Baptist had disciples, and they weren't following Jesus. And then in John 6:66, that's an easy reference to remember. It says, after this, many of his disciples, Jesus, turned back and followed him no more, because he was talking about being the bread of life, and life is only in me, and they're like, oh, I'm not in for that. So his disciples left him. So just so you know that, because if you don't know that, you get really tripped up with a lot of issues about the security of the believer and all that kind of stuff. All right. So, can you give away something you don't have? That's hard. Jesus has authority, and he can give authority, okay? So he has authority. He's been demonstrating that. There's no question. I mean, all the stuff, pretty impressive. And so now he's going to give that authority. Verse 2, the names of the apostles. Stop right there. The first verse said, Jesus called his disciples to himself, and he gave them authority. So here's the math. A disciple plus authority is an apostle. A disciple of Jesus, and in this case, it's specific people that Jesus specifically named and gave them specific authority with a specific task in a specific context, okay? So it's not my understanding that apostles like that exist today. It's not a spiritual gift. This is something that happened in history where this group of people, I'm going to give them authority to go do, okay? That's where he's at. He personally gave them his authority. And then, so we have the names, except verse 4, slow down at verse 4. Simon the Zealot, Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Every time in Matthew, Judas is mentioned. He's mentioned as the betrayer. In chapter 27, we'll get into this more. Kind of covered it in Mark already, but that's on purpose. So zealots were nationalistic people that thought Rome was the problem, and they wanted to incite war with Rome. A subgroup of the zealots were the Scarii, and they didn't separate themselves from the evil people. They mingled among them with daggers and would assassinate them. They would literally kill the people, okay, the leaders, the religious leaders, government leaders. And so Simon the Zealot is on Jesus' team. And you got to just daydream about the meetings they would have as disciples with Matthew here, who's been ripping us off for years. He's at the table. Like, Lord, what are you doing? And then Simon, like, how many people have you killed? What is he doing here? You know what I mean? It's just a really diverse group of guys, all right? And so here's again, we've seen this before. This is Jewish voices in the first century. And I say when Jesus came to the earth, very complex environment. We're just going to focus on the religious voices, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and the Zealots, okay? We won't talk about some of those other things. But here's what's important to understand. These four groups, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and the Zealots, all were formed in the response to Hellenism. Hellenism is a Greek culture that invaded the Hebrew culture. And so Man becomes the measure of all things. God still exists, but he exists to give me power and pleasure. And it's very much like our world, okay? It's just continued on. And so a lot of the Pharisees were rejecting Hellenism. They removed themselves and went to the north and separated. Their whole mindset is separation. Holiness through separation, okay? The Sadducees were like, this is great. Bring us Hellenism. Bring us, culture and power and politics and money and control. The Sadducees loved it. By the way, the Sadducees are the ones that killed Jesus. The Essenes, they're a group of ascetic people who also separated. They went over to Qumran and other places in the desert, really like religious hippies, just super cheap living, and they copied the Dead Sea Scrolls, this group. And then the Zealots, they also don't like Hellenism, and they think they need to kill everybody that doesn't agree with them, okay? So that's kind of where they're at. And but the bottom line is both Simon the Zealot and Judas Iscariot are zealots. They're both in that zealot camp, okay? If you want to be famous and solve a riddle that no one's figured out yet in Scripture, figure out what the name Iscariot means. It's not a name anywhere else. It's not a word anywhere else in the world. Just like, and wherever you go with that, the morphology, it ends up in the world of zealots. I mean, it kind of ends up one way or another with something to do with zealots. Okay. Anyway, that's where we're at with him. So, Jesus gives authority to his disciples over unclean spirits. And isn't it sadly ironic that at the end of Judas' story, Satan enters him? You see the irony? He has the authority over unclean spirits, but because of something that I'll explain, he gets himself, through his own free will, into a place where his agenda and Satan's agenda are perfectly aligned. All right? And he falls off the truck. So we'll talk about that. But Judas, he was a disciple like the others. He had the authority like the others. He preached and he healed and he cast out demons like the others. So what went wrong? What went wrong was his errant expectations of the Messiah. I've talked about this at length before, but being a zealot, he was clearly 100% sure that the Messiah would come and crush Rome. And the Messiah would come and instigate opposition with Rome, and they would join with him. And all of the talk Jesus had about, I'll be crucified and mocked and killed, they're like, wow, yeah, as we fight Rome, I get it. You're just such a martyr. I'm with you. I'm going to fight too. And the further down the road that Jesus goes away from that goal, the more discontent and frustrated Judas gets, because he's like, you're not going where you need to go. You're not going to fight Rome. And that's I'll get to that later, but that's kind of what's going on. All right. So Judas had his own desires that were shaped by his zealot expectations and worldview, and were frustrated. So you might be wondering, because there's a couple verses, that say, well, he was doomed to destruction, the son of perdition. Does he have free will? Yes, he has free will. God somehow uses your free will, my free will, Judas's free will, to accomplish his plan. Here are a couple verses. Listen to this. Acts 2. Men of Israel, this man Jesus, attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders, signs that God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know. This Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified. Now just look at that. This is God's plan, but you did it, your own free will, and you're guilty. You're culpable. You get that? I don't know how it works. I'm just saying it works. God has a plan, and we have free will, and they are both in control of God, but we're not robots. We really do need to make good decisions. Okay, if you want to step out of the box here, if our behavior is programmed and fixed and predetermined, like we don't have any choice over the matter, or even if you think, well, it's just an illusion, why do we have the books of wisdom that beg you, make wise choices? It's so important. It's not just a charade, it's real. We really have to make good decisions. It really, really does matter, okay? Acts 4 says this in the middle of the verse, to do whatever your hand and your plan had predestined. So again, my hands are doing things, and God is predestining, and they work together. So don't just throw your life in neutral autopilot, think whatever happens is God's will, and it must be his will then. that people are burned, raped, and killed. It's like, well, sin is never his plan A. He allows it because, I'm getting off target here, but anyway, let's come down here and get to Judas. Was Judas saved? I really don't venture down this path much. It's above my pay grade to talk about who's saved and who's not saved. But there's some indications here that I don't think he is, okay? Jesus says it would be better if he had never been born. He's the son of perdition and all this. And plus the fact that it seems that Judas, he believed in the Messiah. But it was a different Messiah. It's very much like the question today, are Muslims... Do Christians and Muslims believe in the same God? A while ago, that was a big deal in some academic circles, and I'm like, no, they don't. You can't just make up your own definition of who God is and then say that's the same thing. And Judas made up his own definition of the Messiah. It's like, that's not who he is. So if you believe in your definition of Messiah and it's not the true Jesus Messiah, you didn't connect, okay? And so that's kind of his problem. All right. And then recently, last month, The Chosen episode, the whole series, The Chosen, kind of, got in fire and trouble again. Dallas Jenkins had to do a little video about, would Jesus pray for Judas? I don't know if you saw this. It's like, because he's sitting down at the table with Judas, and Jesus says, I'll pray for you. And people are like, no, he wouldn't. He can't pray for him because he's doomed to destruction. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Jesus said, pray for your enemies. Jesus prayed for the people who are crucifying him in the moment. Jesus would pray for enemies. He probably prayed for Nicodemus. He probably prayed for a lot of Pharisees that didn't turn. Okay? And so he's praying for his enemies, and so I think he would pray for Judas. Now, if you and I are having coffee, I'm like, okay, but what really blows my mind is, would Jesus pray that Judas would change his mind? I don't know. Okay, anyway, we'll just move on there, but... And so he's praying for those who abuse you. He says, pray for your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. So I think he probably did and would pray for Judas, a lot of different things. All right, chapter 10, verse 5. This is weird. He says, go nowhere among the Gentiles. Don't go to the Samaritans. Stay in Galilee. And again, you're like, remember last week? He's like, okay, I'm going to do this miracle. I'm going to raise this girl from the dead, but everybody leave. I don't want you to see this. Remember that? Kind of odd, right? And so here, if he is doing messianic-like, prophecy-fulfilling things, he needs to be in messianic prophecy expecting people like Jews. So go to the Jews. They're the ones that should see what you do and go, Isaiah, Jeremiah. Gentiles, they don't know that. They don't care, okay? So you just do this. And the ministry to Gentiles is coming later. This is a short-term practice run, and that's why he gets into the things that he does, all right? So he personally gave them authority to do Messiah things among Messiah-expecting people so that they would see their Messiah had come, all right? Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. All of those things Jesus has been doing, and now he hands that over to his disciples with authority, apostles, all right? Okay, and so the people in Galilee would recognize that. I mean, the scriptures saturate their culture to such an extent. When somebody's eyes they're brought from blindness to sight, they're like, the Messiah. Yeah, he's supposed to speech and this, and then giving free food, and all of a sudden they start to look at Jesus through the wrong lens, and that's why Jesus, whenever he's in Jewish territory, does a miracle, he's like, shh, don't tell anybody, because your false understanding of who I am is really going to complicate my world as I try to move forward with who I really am. When he's in Gentile territory, he does a miracle. He's like, go tell everybody what the Lord has done for you, because they don't know Messiah. They're just like, he's a great guy, and now he's got power, and I believe in him. So that's what's going on there, okay? All right. So then he says, you received without paying, give without pay. Acquire no gold, silver, copper, belts, no bag, no jewelry. The whole point is don't take a bunch of money and don't get paid for your stuff, okay? So we have some missionaries with us, friends of ours in our churches, Nick and Alex, and how weird would it be when they're from Italy, and if they go up to people in the park and they're like, hey, do you have $5? I'll tell you about Jesus. What is that? That's weird. This is the thing. It's like you receive this, so that pay, just give. Other people support missionaries who have experienced God's grace and want other people to experience it and extend it. And so people like us support missionaries like them so they can go out and they don't have to be like, hey, do you have $10? I'd like to share, what the Bible is all about. Okay? That's just super weird. Sadly, there are places like that, right? It's just like, okay, that's super, super strange. So America has this weird amalgamation of ministry and money. I mean, America has turned the gospel into a product. We turn everything into a product, right? And here's a quote. I read this probably a year ago. I'll read it again. Richard Halverson, the former chaplain of the U.S. Senate, said this. In the beginning, the church was a fellowship of men and women who centered on the living Christ. Then the church moved to Greece, where it became a philosophy. Then it moved to Rome, where it became an institution. Next, it moved to Europe, where it became a culture, and finally, it moved to America, where it became an economic enterprise. We have commodified the gospel. And so you don't believe me? Look at the news and how many big celebrity pastors crash and burn every single year. Zoom out with me and ask, why do we even have celebrity pastors? Because they bring money to the industrial Christian complex, right? And because the metrics that are used to put those people in power are business models and not spiritual models. That's just how our culture is twisted. We have to know that, right? We have to know that and not desire to be a big deal and to have 14 campuses and, you know what I mean? And that's a struggle probably for you and for me. It's just like every staff meeting, we had a meeting like last week. I love a verse in 1 Peter 5. Shepherd the flock that God has given you. Eagerly, willingly. And one of our things is, I'm kind of getting off track here, but one of our things is like, we are under no interest in making this church into another church. You know what I mean? We are who we are. This is who God has given us, and we're happy and eager to serve who God has given us. You know what I mean? Sometimes you go to church and you get this vibe that we need to become like this. Anyway, okay. Stick to the notes. All right, so that's what's going on there. And then Jesus, in verse 11, he has authority to change who is polluted. Because in this verse, it says, if you go to a town or village who is worthy, who is on board with the new covenant, stay there until you depart. And that's great. But if you go to some place and they will not listen to your words, so there's a conversation, reasoning, proof from Scripture. In 11 o'clock here, this is what we're doing with this whole Veritas series, just how do we use words more persuasively? But here, you're among some people and they don't listen to your words. It says, shake the dust off from your feet when you leave that house or town. Now, normally, the righteous Pharisees would do this for the corrupt, polluted Gentile dogs. They would leave the Gentile dogs and they would shake their dust off. And that is like, judgment be on you, you're beneath me, and I'm out of here. And Jesus is like, you're going to take the new covenant to these pious Jews, and then if they don't accept you, you're the one shaking your dust off. And what a crazy cultural thing. Can you imagine Matthew, the tax collector, in a house of a prominent Pharisee who doesn't listen to his words, and Matthew, the crooked Pharisee, or the crooked tax collector, is shaking dust off. That Pharisee would be like, what are you doing? Who do you think you are? Isn't that interesting? So that cultural, that's just a powerful thing that was going on there. Okay, so the new covenant. Jesus is changing through the new covenant what defiled means. It's no longer external stuff. It's defilement of the heart. And you don't have faith and believe in the Son of God, well, then you're defiled, and you need to move towards him. And so that's what's going on. Verse 16, persecution will come. Behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents, as innocent as doves. Wise as serpents. In ancient Near East, serpents had this kind of, they're just known for being wise, not like you might think of wisdom, but it's more the idea of prudent, clever, cunning. And, serpents don't just, they're not dumb. They don't just run out and let you catch them. They're always hiding, and they're always like, you know what I mean? So that's just what was talking about. And so when the disciples get authority, he's saying you need to be wise and innocent. Don't run off and start a war. And don't be so naive that you just give up everything, okay? The weird thing about that word wise, clever, is part of Hellenism, is the Greek culture sweeping in, and Hebrew, the Old Testament's all Hebrew. During the first century, everybody could read Greek, but a lot of the kids couldn't read Hebrew, and so they took the Old Testament in Hebrew and they translated the whole thing into Greek. That's called the Septuagint. And when they did that, the word they chose for Genesis 3:1, here's Genesis 3:1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field. Crafty. That's the same word that was used here about being wise as serpents. Crafty. Not cunning in a bad way, but you're not gullible, okay? You're clever and shrewd with good judgment. So what do you call somebody who's shrewd but not innocent? Some kind of salesman, right? It's just like you're just trying to steal from everybody. What do you call somebody who's innocent but not shrewd? It's like, dude, you have no hope. Don't go to L.A., okay? Anyway, I'm just like big cities, they steal, okay, whatever. And so Jesus is saying you need to be wise as serpents, innocent as doves. Don't get trapped by the enemy, and don't run off and be aggressive and start fighting everybody. You need good judgment, okay? So, the wolves, here's what the wolves will do to the sheep. Verse 17 and on, I'm just going to summarize it. They will deliver you to the legal system. They will flog you in the religious system. They'll drag you before the political system. They'll deliver you over to earthly authorities. You will be delivered by your own family members. You will be hated by all and persecuted. And then I love it, run away. And you're like, I thought you're powerful. I thought you offered us an advantage. I love it. It's just like, let's just run away. That's not really intuitive, right? But that's what Jesus did. He was delivered and flogged and oppressed and hated, and he gives his authority to his disciples. And it's like, you have authority just like I do, you'll live just like I do, and you will be oppressed just like I am. Nobody thinks about that when they buy the WWJD bracelet, right? I'm going to be oppressed just like Jesus. Okay. Like, how would Jesus be oppressed? Whatever. Anyway, we don't think that way. Okay, moving on here. And then this is, I think, the key verse here, verse 24. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher and the servant like his master. If they call the master of the house the devil, Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of his household? He's saying, I have experienced oppression, you will experience oppression, and it's normal. It's coming. Don't make the wrong assumptions about problems and suffering in your life. Happened to me, it's going to happen to you. He normalizes oppression, persecution, and suffering. Interesting. All right? Probably need to hear that word, but this is where Judas falls off the truck. Because he sends them out with authority to do messianic things in a messianic expecting community so they would believe that he's the Messiah, except conquering Rome is not on the menu. He's not about that. And so again, the further Jesus goes down his path and the more it deviates from Judas's and the zealot path, the more frustrated Judas gets, and he is frustrated. So here's the scene. There's a 5-minute YouTube. I'm not going to play it, obviously, but anyway, it's really worth seeing. I think season 5, a kind of a sneak peek about Judas and Jesus talking, and it's an amazing scene. I think they captured it pretty well. Judas is like, hey, I'm a business guy. I know when a deal is going to open and close, and the window for you is closing. You have to stand up and confront Rome, and why won't you listen to me? And Jesus is like, what if my plans are different than yours? And he's just shaking with anger. He's just so frustrated. It's a pretty good 5 minutes, all right? Anyway, the whole thing that really is a clue at the end of everything that Judas, here's the question. Why does Judas betray Jesus? He's not just an evil man. He thinks he's doing the right thing. He thinks he's doing what his rabbi wants in his zealot Messiah mindset. But when it all blows up, when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying some blood. That, his heart was a little bit sensitive. He's like, I missed it. But at this point, he is a man without a country. He can't go back with Jesus because Jesus is going in a whole direction he didn't want to go. And he has already betrayed him, and he can't go back to the other apostles, disciples. And so he kills himself. But this leads me to some interesting questions, all right? So he betrays Jesus because in his mind, I'll get into this in chapter 27 sometime in April, but Judas is the only disciple from the south. All the others are from the north. And throughout all the Old Testament history, the north have been the country bumpkins. Sort of like Nazareth, like, is anything good up there? And Jerusalem is the big deal, the white collar, the black SUVs, the whole we have everything crowd. Judas is from the south, and there's a pretty good likelihood he's like, okay, I know what's going on here, guys. Just we need to get Jesus in a position where he can face off Rome. The fastest way to do that is throw him in front of the chief priests, and that's a short step from them to Rome, and then here we go. He is in a position, in his mind, his zealot mind, he is the only one in the position to usher in this conflict, to get the two heavyweight boxing champions in the same ring and ring the bell and watch it happen, and he'll be, Judas, that was amazing. Except this happens, and he's like, oh, what in the world? He is not interested in conquering Rome, and so that's what's going on. But Jesus says to his disciples, they will oppose you. Don't have fear. Verse 26, have no fear of them, the wolves. Nothing covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light. What you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. So part of a disciple is a public part, right? If you're a disciple, you're announcing the kingdom of heaven is near. That's words. Listen to their words, you have words. And if a disciple is like covering up their witness and testimony and hiding under a rock, and is like, I'm not going to say anything, Jesus is like, that's not the plan. That's not helpful. I need people to go out and speak. And then he says, don't fear those who can kill the body, because sure, the Pharisees, they can kill you, but they can't kill your soul. So that's what he's talking about. So this context of fear, talking about that. All right. Then he gets into, moving on here, verse 34. He says, don't be surprised by opposition. It doesn't mean something's wrong. Right there is something we probably need to slow down and really hear. Don't be surprised by opposition, persecution. It doesn't mean something's wrong. In our culture, we are so wealthy and comfortable. As soon as something bad happens, our natural inclination is, what's wrong? What did I do wrong? Because the quiet assumption is everything should be easy and pleasant. In fact, that platform has made it very difficult for our culture to think about the problem of evil. Because the problem of evil is only a problem if you start from a platform of comfort. If you don't start from comfort, it's just evil. And we're evil, and it kind of falls apart. I don't want to be insensitive, but I'm just saying that pay attention to where you start your discussion and assumptions about the problem of evil. So here, don't be surprised by evil or opposition. And then he says, don't think, verse 34, don't think I've come to bring peace. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. In other words, don't be surprised if there's a lack of peace, because my agenda is not peace. My agenda is the message. The message, not a sword, is going to bring division. Father, son, mother, mother-in-law, all this stuff. Own household. Some of you have experienced that because of your faith. Your household is fractured. That makes it very difficult. That's exactly what Jesus is talking about, carrying your cross. It doesn't mean we should be belligerent and nasty. It just simply means because I believe this and some in my family don't, there's a rift. And that's just part of the package. He's like, it doesn't mean something's wrong. Now, we need to be skillful in those relationships, and there are some great resources down that road. Okay, and then he says there's reward for everybody who receives you. They receive me. Rewards are given for receiving Jesus in faith, not for production quotas. Can't you see if Jesus is given authority and heal and cast out all this stuff? I mean, it's a natural tendency to I need 3 more raised from the dead by Friday. What do you got? Well, I got 3 guys that were blind now. Oh, man, where can I go? I mean, it's just this weird quota thing that's not how Jesus is working. So rewards aren't based on that. So behind all this is this question. What is success for Jesus' disciples? What is success for you? And he said it back in verse 24, I think. It is enough for the disciple to be like his master. Success is for us to be like him. It's not necessarily doing great things for him. It's simply being like him. Okay. So, we are not interested in the question between conquering or compassion. We're conquering by compassion. Compassion is the new Torah. It's the new way Jesus works. It's the new way he runs his new covenant. And so success is being like Jesus, not achieving great things for Jesus. And that is something our culture really gets messed up quickly. It's really hard to find two people in Christian circles. One, the person that when you say, how are you doing? And their response is, just really rested and peaceful. That's like, that person doesn't exist. The other person is, how's your church doing? It's just great. I love the 17 people we have. God is just so powerful and so great. Oh, well, obviously you're not doing something right, 17 people. You see what I'm saying? We have these weird assumptions about we have to be bigger. And that's we want to look at that in the mirror and go, I don't have to have that. And I can be restful in a crazy culture, okay? So we always have a couple key questions. This is Matthew's questions for us today. How have you been defining success for yourself, for your spiritual life? Is that how Jesus would define it? And what about your ladder? Where's your ladder, okay? Is your ladder leaning against the right building? Maybe you have the building of money, success, independence, and comfort and stress-free living, and to an extent, that's all of us, right? It's where we live. So if your ladder's, then you spend your whole career climbing the ladder, you get to the top of it, now you're old, and you realize my ladder's on the wrong building. You can't go back 40 years and move the ladder to a different building. See what I'm saying? So what's success? What building are you putting your ladder on and spending your decades climbing up? Who are you becoming? And is this defining success as Jesus would define it? So that's, I think, where Matthew is ending us today. So, I'm going to go back one slide. I like the statement down here. Success is being like Jesus, not achieving great things for Jesus. So just, as my friend would say, put that in your pipe and smoke it. He means to meditate, okay, I think. I don't know what he meant, but anyway, all right. So, Lord, thank you for the ability to be in our culture and not of our culture. It is a weird, wacky culture, and it seems to be coming unglued at the seams, crumpled up and thrown in the furnace, and so we pray for wisdom as we navigate this. As we increasingly maybe have some of our privileges and rights curtailed by our culture, our government, may we remember that this happened to you. We can be at peace. We cannot be anxious. And so may we draw close to you and really feed on you and identify with you in your sufferings and just find this crazy peace in the midst of deep disappointment and opposition when it comes. Amen.